program on U.S.-Mexican trade relations. James Jones, the new ambassador to Mexico, will discuss why the U.S. should support the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA. 45 minutes later, our discussion of the North American Free Trade Agreement will continue with Pat Choate, who co-authored with Ross Perot the book, Save Your Job, Save Our Country, Why NAFTA Must Be Stopped Now. He'll discuss why the U.S. should not support NAFTA. At 8 o'clock, we'll go to FBI headquarters here in Washington for the swearing-in ceremony of Judge Louis Freeh as the new director of the FBI. We'll follow that ceremony with today's White House news briefing by Budget Director Leon Panetta and Economic Advisor Laura Tyson on the Midsummer Review of the Budget and Gross Domestic Product. But next, James Jones, the new ambassador to Mexico, joins us for a viewer call-in on U.S.-Mexican trade relations.
James Jones, why did you want to be the United States' new ambassador to Mexico?
Well, when President Clinton called me in May, he talked about his keen interest in developing a closer relationship with all of Latin America, beginning with Mexico. And while I had not planned to return to public service quite yet, I was impressed by the President's commitment, and I've always been told you don't say no when the President or anyone says your country needs your services.
When one looks at your resume and sees that most recently you were chairman and CEO of the American Stock Exchange, and as a member of Congress you served as the chairman of the House Budget Committee, you can assume that the administration wanted a focus on business and economics.
Well, I think very clearly the economic relationship between the United States and Mexico and the opportunities for both of our countries are paramount. And if we can solve that particular problem, the commercial, the economic relationship, then the other problems that we have in both countries will be a lot easier to take care of, whether it's immigration problems or narco-trafficking problems or any other kinds of problems, or environmental problems. Once we make a good start and progress on the economics, the others are a lot easier to handle.
Good evening, and thanks for being with us here on C-SPAN. We're going to be talking to the United States' new ambassador to Mexico, James Jones, who is joining us from New York City this evening, and we'll be opening up our telephone lines here on C-SPAN in about 6 or 7 minutes for your questions around the country for Mr. Jones. I mentioned that Mr. Jones has most recently been chairman and CEO of the American Stock Exchange, and longtime C-SPAN viewers will remember him from his days in the United States House of Representatives, where he represented Oklahoma's 1st District. He served in the Congress on the Ways and Means and also chairs the Budget Committee. When are you taking your post?
Actually, next week. I was sworn in a week ago, I guess, August 20th, and we've been preparing, moving, and all the details that go with that. So we're going to be going to Mexico City, Olivia and I, next week, and take up our post at that point.
How familiar are you with Mexico?
Well, my first trip to Mexico was 28 years ago. I was 25 years old and a brand new member of President Lyndon Johnson's White House staff, and President Johnson summoned me to the LBJ Ranch and said he wanted to make his first trip as president outside the United States, and wanted to make that first trip to Mexico because of his special feeling and relationship with Mexico. So he sent me there to set up the trip, and then subsequent to that I've been to Mexico many times. Olivia and I took our wedding trip there 25 years ago this year. And most recently, as chairman of the American Stock Exchange, we saw the great potential of developing relationships with Mexico as well as Chile and Argentina. And so we have had a strategic effort in Mexico, and I've been there quite a few times in the last 4 years.
Do you already know President Salinas?
I've met President Salinas, had meetings with him on a number of occasions, both in Mexico City and then in New York. And I'm enormously impressed with him and his entire government. As a matter of fact, I have said that once you meet the cabinet of the Salinas government and compare them to anywhere in the world, there is not any other government with greater talent and depth of talent than you see in this particular government in Mexico.
You mentioned 4 issues. In addition to NAFTA, they were immigration, narco-trafficking, and environmental issues. Can I assume that those are your list of priorities as ambassador?
Well, I'm going to prioritize what our goals are as ambassador there, but those clearly are the four big issues that I think we have to deal with rather quickly and deliberately and continuously. So my number one priority as I go down there is to both pass and implement the North American Free Trade Agreement, because I think that is in the best interest of both the United States and Mexico, and it's paramount to everything else, and will make everything else a lot easier.
How difficult is the route to passage as you see it in the U.S. Congress?
Well, up to this point, the opponents of NAFTA have had basically the platform, and while many of them are well-meaning, I think they have a lot of misinformation, and that misinformation and fear has been spread, and so it's going to be a tough battle. However, in the final analysis, this is a foreign policy question as well as a trade question, and I think the facts are overwhelming that it's in the best interest of the United States, and that failure to pass NAFTA would be one of the major foreign policy blunders and trade policy blunders this country will have made in this decade. And so for those reasons, I think a majority of the Congress will listen to the facts and will be casting votes in favor of NAFTA, because I don't think they will want to be responsible for a major blunder of this nature.
In the United States Congress, the agreement needs a simple majority in both houses. What has to happen in the Mexican government for implementation?
Well, the implementation will go through the Mexican Parliament also, but obviously with President Salinas' leadership in Mexico and his strong support of it, the North American Free Trade Agreement in Mexico looks very good. It has already passed the Parliament in Canada, and so it's just a question of the remaining two countries approving it.
Let me pause for a minute, Mr. Jones, and give our viewers the C-SPAN numbers so they can participate. If you live in the Eastern or Central time zones, our number here, 202-628-2525. If you're watching us in the Mountain or Pacific time zone, 202-783-2727. And we'll ask our regular viewers of this program to remember C-SPAN's 30-day policy. Hold off and let other people phone in tonight if you've called us within the past month. Later on this evening, we are going to be talking with economist Pat Choate, and he co-authored with Ross Perot the new book Against NAFTA, and I wanted to read you one sentence from the book and get your reaction. He says, if NAFTA is ratified, the stream of U.S. factories moving to Mexico will become a flood.
Well, first of all, I haven't read the book and don't know precisely what context that passage comes from, but I will say that I think that is just totally wrong. As a matter of fact, if NAFTA is not passed, the likelihood of a flood of U.S. factories going to Mexico would be even greater. We've already seen what can happen when the Mexican government lowered its trade barriers and tariffs, and what we have seen is a massive increase in jobs, higher paying jobs, in the United States. We have seen, for example, most recently, General Motors, which had established a plant operation in Mexico, moving it back to Michigan. So labor rates are just one, and not the majority, of the factors in determining where a company locates its plants. But it seems to me, logic would tell us that if we fail to pass NAFTA, and if the Mexican government decided to go back to its old ways and raise the tariffs in the United States, companies from the United States know what an attractive market Mexico is, and they would be moving across the border or doing whatever is necessary in order to penetrate that market. With a free trade zone, the jobs will be increased in the United States, and the jobs will be increased in Mexico, because both markets will expand.
Do you expect that there will be a meeting of the, right now, inequity between U.S. workers' salaries and Mexican workers' salaries?
Well, first of all, there is a disparity, considerable disparity in the average wages in Mexico and the United States now, just as there are disparities between most of the developing world and even some of the developed world wages and the United States. But that's not the key factor. if wages were the only factor, then Haiti or Bangladesh would be the industrial capitals of the world. But that's not the factor. I do expect that Mexican wages will increase. President Salinas has been emphatic about one of the reasons he wants NAFTA is to improve the quality of life and the purchasing power of Mexican citizens and to allow Mexican citizens to have job opportunities in Mexico without having to go across the border into the United States. And so I expect those salaries to increase, but the evidence is very clear that wages will increase in the United States also in respect to trade with Mexico. Just in the last 5 years, since the Salinas government has substantially lowered tariffs between Mexico and the United States, 400,000 jobs have been created in the United States, and these are higher paying jobs than before. A total of about 700,000 jobs in the United States are dependent upon our trade with Mexico. And so I think as that trade expands and as our economic relationship expands, I think you're going to see U.S. workers increase in their wages, but Mexican workers will too. But it won't be, I don't expect parity anytime soon.
Let's take our first question for you from our viewers, Mr. Jones. It's from El Cajon, California.
Hello?
You're on the air, sir.
Okay. Well, I hate to can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
I hate to contradict you, but I lived 12 years in Mexico, sir, and the trouble with you guys, you go down there and stay in the tourist hotels, 5-star hotels, and then come back and tell you what it's all about. Well, you don't know. 80%, you don't have to stay down there 12 years, just stay down there a year, or go through elections down there. I went through 2 of them.
When was that, sir?
Jalisco.
I say, when was that? When?
The last, well, from about 79 to 91.
Okay.
I went through 2 presidential elections down there. Madrid, remember him?
Yes.
Do you know how they have elections down there? Do you know how they puts up their posters? They walk right into the drugstores and slap them on the cases, the police do. One's got the tape and the other guy, he's standing by. And they go into the pool room, do the same thing, put their posters on the wall. That's how they run elections down there. But I'm not getting at that. 80%. Now, I've been hearing how good a customer Mexico is to us. Well, the only reason they're such a good customer is 80% of everything they've got in their homes down there, including their homes for the last 40 years, have been built and paid for with American dollars by the wetbacks that come over here and work. If you live down there, you just only have to live a couple of months on any normal street in Mexico, in a regular town, you'll soon find out the average family has 10 people. And in each that family has at least 1 or 2 people working in the United States, either part-time or full-time, and 80% of them are coyotes. And they even commute. I mean, after they do it a couple of times, they don't even need a guide to get across the border. They commute. I know guys in my block that go up just to pick strawberries, other guys just to go up to pick lemons.
All right, sir, let's get a response from Mr. Jones. Thanks for calling in.
Well, I appreciate your concern. Let me try to answer it in a couple of ways. Some of the statistics you related, I don't believe bear out, but the point is that Mexico is the United States' 3rd largest trading partner. The preference of the Mexican people for goods and services are American. Now, for many years, the Mexican worker, as you say, has been unable to make much of a living in Mexico. And as a result, many Mexicans have crossed the border to work, some legally, some illegally. What the North American Free Trade Agreement asks us to do is to look at the possibilities of the future. And those possibilities are that we will have the largest market in the world, the freest market in the world, and the market that has the greatest growth potential in the world, far surpassing Europe or even the Asian countries. Now, if that is true, and I believe it to be true, that means that the Mexican workers, the people in Mexico, will be able to have greater purchasing power because they will have jobs at higher wages, and they will be purchasing more U.S. goods that would create jobs in the United States. And so what has happened in the past, and the fact that Mexican workers have not had the same opportunities in the past should not be what we judge the future by. If we did that, then Korea would still be as backward as it was 10, 20 years ago. Taiwan, other countries like that that have been poor and ill-equipped to compete in world economies that are now able to compete, it just wouldn't have happened if we didn't believe in that. I think Mexico has the greatest potential, and we ought to be a partner in that potential.
Houston is next.
Hello, Mr. Jones. I agree with a little bit of what you were saying there, but let's just look at the fact that 1% of the people in Mexico probably control 80% of the money. Okay, so somehow or another there has to be structural change in Mexico to where there is a middle class. Right now there is absolutely no middle class. You can go to Mexico City, Acapulco, Manzanillo, Cancun, any of those people, and there's the Indian Mexicans that are begging on the street at any place, very nice places. There's no education. It's not equal for everyone in Mexico. And what I want to know is how there's going to be a middle class. I mean, if NAFTA will produce a middle class in Mexico and get the main people educated, the majority of the people educated. Right now, people like Salinas, he went to Harvard, which is great. I think he's a great man. But how is he going to get the majority of the people educated and get a middle class, and then NAFTA will work?
All right, sir. Thanks very much. Let's get a response.
Well, I think you make a very valid point that no democratic economic form of government can last long or grow without a truly good, solid, growing middle class. I do believe that the Salinas government is very much committed to that. I have seen a little bit of what they're trying to do to expand the educational opportunities. I have seen a little bit of what they're trying to do to expand the opportunities through their solidarity program to actually build their communities, build their villages, and to have a better quality of life. And part of that quality of life is a better education system. Also, President Salinas, as much if not more than any world leader, has conducted a privatization program to basically get the government out of owning all of these businesses and industries and to disperse that ownership. And what I think I have seen in my recent travels down there is a new class of entrepreneur, a new class of business person growing up, and that will develop a new middle class. And if you couple that with higher wages, that is also going to buttress the middle class. But you make a very valid point, and one that I think has to be stressed.
Warrington, Florida is next.
Oh, good evening. Thank you so much for being on. It's so difficult to get through. I wanted to answer Mr. Jones's question, and then I have a question for him. Mr. Jones, the reason that the companies don't go to some of these other countries that you mentioned, like Haiti, is because they don't have a stable government. In order for the investments, the $26 billion worth of investment money that is being drained out of the United States that could build jobs and factories here to be protected, you need a stable government. That's what NAFTA is all about. The majority of that agreement is protecting U.S. investors. And I don't understand how taking $26 billion out of this country and making the Wall Streeters like yourself and the bankers rich at the expense of jobs in America on some grandiose promise that there's going to be jobs, some kind of fictitious jobs that are never mentioned, and wages are never mentioned, is good for this country. I think you're a fraud. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your candor. Let me just comment a couple of ways. Number one, it's not a grandiose scheme. First of all, we should not be afraid to compete in a free and open market. Every time we have been able to lower tariffs, whether it was the Kennedy round, the Tokyo round, or whatever trade agreements lowered tariff barriers around the world, the United States has benefited by increasing jobs and by increasing the standard of living. I mean, we should not belittle ourselves. We are more productive, we are competitive, and we can compete in any market. What has already happened by the lowering of tariffs, a considerable lowering but not free trade, between the United States and Mexico is a creation of 400,000 jobs in the United States. And these are jobs that are better paying than jobs that are just domestically involved. And so, you know, we're living in a world, and we are not going to be able to escape that. Those who want to put up tariff barriers, who want to put up protection, should remember the lesson of 1930, when the Smoot-Hawley tariffs were put into place to protect the United States. And it was those Smoot-Hawley tariffs that made the Great Depression great, because what it did was to bring to a standstill world commerce. And the United States can compete in world commerce and compete in North American commerce. What we need is the kind of playing field that I think the North American Free Trade Agreement gives us.
Where will those 400,000 jobs come from?
Well, they come from a whole variety of fields. For example, one of my avocational responsibilities over the past 4 years has been chairman of the American Business Conference. The American Business Conference is composed of 100 of the fastest growing companies in the United States, and they range everything from service companies to electronics to manufacturing to sales, etc. So it runs the gamut. But in order to be in this organization, the American Business Conference, these companies have to grow at twice the rate of the national average, and that means growing jobs, etc. And what we have discovered is that those companies, already the twice as fast growing companies as others in this country, those companies that are involved in the export business, in international trade, increase jobs in the United States a lot faster and a lot larger than those companies who only deal domestically. And so it's a whole range of companies that have opportunities by being involved in world commerce. And the major impediment are those countries that throw up tariff barriers and make it hard for us to compete. By having a free trade zone, if you will, or market, we can compete, and we're convinced the Mexicans will be able to improve their quality of life too. So it's a win-win situation.
San Diego.
Mr. Johns, good luck in your appointment.
Thank you very much.
I live in San Diego, and we have a problem with the pollution coming over in the rivers. And I was wondering if you could put some pressure on the government to maybe get a waste treatment plant together and you know, try and collect all this, maybe a public works project to collect all the sewage that's just flowing into the rivers and running out in the ocean on the United States side. And I'm sure you're aware of the New River also.
Yes, I had a good meeting a week or so ago with Congressman Filner, who represents that area of San Diego, and he is very concerned about the pollution and the environmental problems involved, and it's one of the issues that I will take with me to Mexico to talk to the government officials. And I believe that it's in both of our countries' interest to attack these kinds of environmental problems. But again, I have to go back to the North American Free Trade Agreement, that if there is pollution or environmental problems on the Mexican side of the border, it takes money to clean them up, and without an expanding economy, without new wealth being created, you're not going to be able to pay for those. And so the side agreements on environment have been the most progressive that's ever been, on environmental issues, the most progressive that's ever been included in any kind of a trade agreement. So I think it's a step in the right direction, but specifically the area just south of San Diego and the water pollution that exists there is one that I do intend to take up with the Mexican government.
Mr. Jones, in terms of size and people and budget, where does the U.S. mission in Mexico rank?
It's a very large mission, and it may be the largest our largest mission in the world because of the many different kinds of issues that we have between our two countries. So it's a very large mission. Beyond that, I can't give you too many details because I will be going down next week to meet most of the personnel for the first time.
Our next call for you is from Lake City, Florida.
Yes, Mr. Jones?
Yes.
I'm one of the people that probably has had a lot of information on the negative side of NAFTA, and I'm interested in knowing if it's true that a lot of the jobs that have already gone down to the Maquiladora Strip add up to about 600,000, and if it's only going to add 400,000 jobs to the United States, where will NAFTA give us an advantage?
Well, I've not seen that figure before, and the figure that I was talking about was the 400,000 jobs that have been created in the United States just in the last 5 years as a result of lowering tariff barriers between our two countries. All of the studies that I have seen, at least the independent studies that are not conducted by one special interest group, but the independent studies indicate that there will be some job loss and that there has been some job loss in the trade between our two countries, but on net there has been a job gain in the United States. So the net figure is what is important. Now, I would also point out that the normal ebbs and flows of the economy create job losses, but hopefully if our economy grows, it creates more job gains so that you have a net increase. And that is what we would expect out of the North American Free Trade Agreement.
You conceded at the beginning of the program that the opponents of NAFTA have had the loudest voice to date. Why have those of you who are in favor of the deal let them do that? Why haven't you spoken out more?
Well, first of all, I spoke out quite a bit before, when I wasn't expecting to go there, and I was expecting to stay in the private sector, because I think it's good for the United States. After I was asked by the President to serve, it was not appropriate until I was sworn in to be speaking out on these issues. But I think one of the reasons the opponents have had the platform, so to speak, and the proponents have not been speaking out as much is the proponents have been waiting to conclude the side agreements, especially the side agreements on the environment and the side agreements on labor, to see what the agreement looks like. Now that our trade negotiator, Mickey Cantor, and his team have concluded those side agreements, and they're very good, now that the proponents can speak out and say what the facts are and what's in the trade agreement. But until that was the case, they really didn't have a full picture that they could talk about.
Did you support the agreement before the side agreements were made?
Well, yes, I thought the North American Free Trade Agreement is one of those geopolitical moves that is very important for the United States, because what you have is the entire developing world basically looking upon this relationship and determining whether or not these two countries, with all of their disparities and all of those kinds of things, can make it work. And if we can, then I believe you're going to see the developing world have a much closer foreign policy as well as economic ties with the United States. Now, why is that important economically? Because as you look around the world, the growth economies, the growth opportunities are in the developing world. That's where the opportunities are. And if the United States can make this work, and have a special entree to these growth economies, it's in the best interest of the United States. So for economic reasons, in the best interest of the United States, I agreed with the concept of the North American Free Trade Agreement. Obviously, if they had concluded the treaty and it had not been in our best interest, I would have not hesitated to speak out against it.
Next call from Mr. Jones, Dearborn, Michigan.
Hello?
Yes, you're on the air, sir.
Yes, my name's Jim Utley, and I'm concerned about the impact of NAFTA in the Midwest region, and what type of job training programs are going to be available, and quite frankly, what kind of jobs are going to be available after the flood of factories leave in this area.
Well, let me let me make a couple of comments. First of all, when I was in Congress 10 years ago, everybody said the Rust Belt, the great Midwest manufacturing sector, would never come back, and it's come back very strong and it's very competitive in world commerce. So I want to congratulate the region for having done a very good job of becoming globally competitive. Number two, you make an absolutely important and vital point, and that is the job training. In any kind of economic adjustment, even if we didn't have a NAFTA, there would be economic adjustment. We ought to, as a country, be retraining those workers who are put out of work because of changes in the economy, giving them new skills and competitive skills to compete in this global economy and to have an opportunity at a better job in the future. So I believe, although I do not know all of the administration's plans at this time, but I believe that a trade adjustment assistance program, a retraining program, a new opportunity program for any displaced workers will be a part of the administration's package. And it's something that was not done well in the past, but I believe this administration is vitally committed to it and will do a good job at it.
Next question, Castle Rock, Washington.
Yes, good evening, Susan. For Mr. Jones, I see that he was American Business Conference, the president on that. And I think that's the whole worry about most of us out here. Who besides lawyers and a few politicians and bankers sat on the original negotiating committee for this treaty?
Well, let me say as to who sat on the negotiating committee for the treaty. There was a whole wide variety of people from business, from the professions, and from labor who were advisors. I don't know the precise name of what they were called, but advisors to the negotiating team. As far as the American Business Conference is concerned, I want to be very clear. These are not your staid, old, huge corporate organizations. These are your entrepreneurial organizations. These are the people who have gone out there and taken risks and created a lot of new jobs in this country, and they are unanimously for the North American Free Trade Agreement, which tells me that those who have created jobs, those who are entrepreneurs, those who do like to take risks and do like to look to the future instead of just protecting their wealth, those are the ones who see real opportunity and real promise in the North American Free Trade Agreement.
Ithaca, New York, you're on the air.
Yes, good afternoon, Mr. Ambassador. I have a question for you more on the Mexican perspective, or from the perspective of the Mexican economy. A number of people are concerned that the primary economic activity that will be going down to Mexico will be the larger corporation, and that small and medium-sized economic activity and firms in Mexico will suffer from the competition of a lot of North American products which are cheaper. And there's a general worry whether this renewed economic activity or increased economic activity will actually benefit the people that had been mentioned from a person who had asked a previous question, the lower class especially. What do you think would be the effects on what is really the larger part of the economy, and as far as fomenting economic activity among the poorer in the Mexican economy?
Yeah, let me make, again, a couple of comments. Number one, I think there has been a lot of concern among small business people in Mexico. I've read about it. I can't say firsthand, but I've read in the newspapers a lot of the concern they have. Again, some of them will not be able to compete. Some of them will be able to compete very effectively, the same as in this country. But the lower end of the economic scale, the poor in Mexico, I think have some real opportunities with this treaty, because both medium, small, and large corporations will have to compete, and part of that competition is going to have to be to upgrade the skills of workers, and as those skills are upgraded, they have to be rewarded with better pay. I have been impressed, again, as I say, I've followed Mexican activities for 28 years, And I have said that, that this government, more than any I've seen before, has shown a sensitivity toward the poor workers in Mexico and in trying to improve the quality of their life and their purchasing power more than I've seen in any time in the last 28 years. So, and I believe that their strong support, the Salinas government's strong support for the North American Free Trade Agreement, is to improve the quality of life, especially for those people in their society who are at the lower end of the economic scale.
Next question for Ambassador Jones, Indianapolis.
Yes, Mr. Jones. The bankers had loaned 3 countries a lot of money. That was Panama, Mexico, and Brazil. Now, we gave away the Panama Canal in order to pay off the loans to Panama. And isn't this Mexico deal, I remember hearing Mr. Gonzalez on the floor of the House several times saying that the financial deal is the real deal here in this Mexico free trade agreement. And nobody, I haven't heard anybody go into that particularly.
Well, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I even saw, surprisingly enough, David Rockefeller was on one of those news shows, and I don't remember which one. But I would like for you to comment, is this a way for the American taxpayer now to pick up this bill for the international bankers' loans?
Well,
Thank you.
Well, first of all, the American taxpayer won't be picking up any bill under the North American Free Trade Agreement. The whole purpose is for the private sector of the 2 economies to grow, and one of the byproducts of that, I suppose, would be if Mexican interests borrow money from U.S. banks, they will be able to pay back without having taxpayer interference or support. I believe that that will be the case, and that should be in something that we would want to have done. Our bankers are going to make loans in this country and elsewhere, and hopefully those loans are going to create a more productive society so that those loans can be repaid. Because if they're not repaid, then we have a banking crisis on our hands, and that hurts everybody.
We were talking about your family. You mentioned that your wife Olivia will be moving to Mexico with you. What about children?
Well, we have 2 sons we're very proud of, and Jeffrey, who's a year out of Stanford, is working here in New York at a firm called Donaldson, Lufkin, Jenrette, and he will stay in New York working. And our younger son, Adam, is a student at SMU, but right now he is in the wilderness somewhere in the state of Washington on the National Outdoor Leadership School program. So he'll be working in the wilderness and living off the land for the next 8 or 9 weeks.
Not expecting to move to Mexico with you?
No, he'll continue his college education, but he'll be coming down to Mexico after he completes this wilderness program.
Paris, California is next. What's your question?
Yes, Mr. Jones, I really oppose NAFTA. I think that Mexico has a credibility problem. What can we expect from them to maybe change that? And maybe then the American people could trust them to maybe make this work for us? And one other real quick thing.
Yes.
What jobs, please? I keep hearing the same thing. Oh, there's hundreds of thousands of jobs created. Other than exporting our businesses out of America, what jobs are we talking about, sir? Thank you.
Okay. First of all, I respect your feeling of opposition, and I think one of the things that has not been adequately explained is what the modern Mexico is becoming, and I would hope that some of the leadership of Mexico could be interviewed more on programs like this, could go around the United States and answer these kinds of questions, because I think it tells a story that you could see better than I can relate it as to what this new modern Mexican outlook is, and I think it's very impressive. Now, as to what kinds of jobs to expect, I believe that it's going to be a whole variety of jobs. In the textile industry, for example, we have lost a lot of jobs to the Far East, to the Asian Pacific countries. I believe many of those jobs are going to come back and are going to create jobs both in the United States and in Mexico. I think the same thing is going to be true in electronics and some of the high-tech areas. I think you're going to see the higher end of a lot of production being done in the United States, and an increase in some of the lesser paying and more or less highly productive and highly skilled jobs being performed and jobs being created in Mexico. And I think there's going to be a net increase in jobs in both countries, which again is going to help on a lot of issues, including the environment, immigration issues, and things like that.
Washington, D.C.
Yes, Mr. Jones, how are you?
I'm
nice
fine.
Talking to you.
Thank you.
You argue that the administration needed the side agreements to sell NAFTA, but the side agreements were completed over 2 weeks ago, and the White House is not planning anything substantial to promote this until September the 14th. It almost seems as if the President himself is not convinced about this agreement. Why do they need all this time for that the opposition will no doubt use to serve their cause? Let me just try another real quick question. A distinguished Mexican scholar in the last issue of Foreign Affairs calls for international verification of Mexican presidential elections as a condition to pass this agreement. What do you think about the electoral system in Mexico, and should their elections be monitored?
Thank you.
Well, first of all, on the administration, just this week, Secretary of State Christopher and I appeared before the press at the State Department, and he gave his strong, renewed endorsement of NAFTA. I know that Secretary Brown and Secretary Benson and others in the administration have been speaking out for it. But it is a question of timing, and I think President Clinton understands timing very well, and he will be very active and support this. He convinced me of that when he talked to me on the telephone. As far as the electoral process in Mexico is concerned, history of elections in Mexico has not been good. I believe there are a number of reforms that are taking place in this government. The most recent, I believe, have been passed by the Parliament just within the last 2 weeks or so, that mandates a stronger minority opposition party representation, that attacks voter fraud issues by having a particular kind of voter ID card that's very modern, very up to date. And so I think the move is in the right direction. Every government, including the United States, constantly has to look at electoral reform and the honesty of the electoral process. We're doing that right now in the United States Congress with regard to financing of elections. And so while I have great faith in the United States electoral process, I think there's always room for improvement. Obviously, there's room for improvement in Mexico, and I see progress being made.
We have just 1 minute. We're going to squeeze in a call from Flemington, New Jersey. Need you to be quick, sir.
Hello.
Oh, ma'am. Sorry, go ahead.
Hello. I had been to Mexico a number of years ago, and recently in a visit, I was impressed that they are making great changes, and that was Acapulco. But I am concerned in the NAFTA situation that the priorities for the United States to appeal if they have a disparaging, if they have a disagreement with the way things are going. Tariffs and international trade, I understand that is very beneficial to all the world nations to trade and intermingle trade, but I understand that we would give up United States sovereignty.
No.
And I am afraid of that.
Caller, I need to let you go. We're almost out of time. Thank you. Mr. Jones?
I'll try to be very brief. The sovereignty issue has concerned both all the Canadians, the Mexicans, and the Americans, and none of our countries are going to have to give up sovereignty. However, on both the environmental and the labor issues, there are new mechanisms that will be protective of the workers, protective in the environment, and mechanisms to see that that happens. And I think that's very good, and it's a move in the right direction.
Next week, James Jones will take his new post as a U.S. ambassador to Mexico. Ambassador Jones, thanks very much for being with us here on C-SPAN tonight.
Thank you very much, Susan. Good to be back.
We are going to continue discussing NAFTA. In a few minutes, we'll be talking with Pat Choate, the economist who helped Ross Perot write his book on NAFTA, which will be coming out Labor Day weekend. In our break, we're going to show you some statements that the U.S. Labor Secretary, Robert Reich, had to make today about NAFTA and worker displacement.